It's very easy to make mistakes when wearing a suit, and that's because most of us have never been taught how to properly wear one. Now, there are many great videos on YouTube about fit issues, so today I will focus only on common styling mistakes. The first styling mistake would be a matching pocket square and tie. This is incredibly common, and one of the reasons for that is that many stores sell them as a bundle. So you get a matching pocket square with a tie. On the surface, it doesn't really sound like a big deal, right? But the problem here is quite subtle, and it's more of a subconscious issue. Because when the pocket square and the tie are identical, we subconsciously perceive it as being too perfect, and it feels a little bit artificial. Instead, you want the pocket square and the tie to complement each other, and they can be relatively similar if you want, but they should never be the exact same design and color. I don't want to overcomplicate this, so if you're in doubt, you can never go wrong with the classic white linen pocket square, which works with pretty much anything. Mistake number 2 would be wearing the wrong shoes for your suit. And there are a few common examples here. The first one would be the classic dress sneaker. This shoe is a mix between a pair of sneakers and a pair of dress shoes, and unfortunately, it just never really works with a suit. I don't really like them in general, but especially with a suit, they're just too casual, and oftentimes they also have a wide rubber sole, which really draws a lot of attention to your shoes. The same can be said about the classic suit and sneaker combination. Now you have to remember that the suit is inherently formal, especially the classic business suit, which is in navy or charcoal. And that means that you also want to go with more formal shoes. Sneakers, on the other hand, are very casual, and oftentimes they are also in a white color, and that really clashes, not only in formality, but also in color contrast. It draws way too much attention to your shoes, and call me old-fashioned, but I think it should always be avoided. It's typically a much better idea to go with either Oxfords or Derbys, or if you want something more casual, you can go with different kinds of loafers. For example, tassel loafers or penny loafers are a great alternative to the classic dress shoe. Another common shoe mistake that you see is guys wearing tan shoes with darker suits. In general, you can follow a simple guideline here. Basically, when you're wearing a darker suit, try to also go with a darker pair of shoes. So typically that's going to be dark brown, black or burgundy. And if you're wearing a lighter colored suit, for example a light cream in summer, that's when you can go with a lighter pair of shoes as well. But if you wear tan shoes with a dark suit, for example, there's just too much of a contrast between the two. And similar to the sneakers, your eyes are immediately drawn to the shoes, and that's not exactly what you want to achieve. Another common mistake is simply doing too much. Now, this is particularly common with your first made-to-measure suit or even your first suit in general. And what I mean by this is that you see a lot of guys going with as many different options for styling as they can. They might go with a lapel pin, they go with colored stitching, they choose the Scarface lining combined with some funny cufflinks, monk straps, and maybe even some very extravagant color. So that could be, for example, a bold red suit or a purple suit. Now don't get me wrong, I'm all for adding personality and color to your outfits, but there comes a point where it's a little bit too much. Especially with your first couple of suits, you typically want to go with the more conservative options, because that way you're going to get a much more versatile garment. So try to keep the extras to a minimum. Another common issue is wearing overly saturated and slightly shiny shirts. The most common one here are different shades of blue and also red. Now the issue here is that it just looks a little bit unprofessional. It's not the most pleasing to the eye. And the problem here again is that many shops actually sell these shirts, but in general, you want to go with more subtle shirts that have less of a saturation. The classic choice would be a very light blue color, because that's incredibly versatile. It works with pretty much any skin tone and suit color. Mistake number 5 is having the wrong lapel width for your body type. As a rule of thumb, if you have broader shoulders, you also want to have a broader lapel. And if your shoulders are quite narrow, you also want to have slimmer lapels, because that way you just create a much better balance and harmony in your outfit. Now the problem is that unfortunately these days, almost any brand, especially when you walk into any department store, they all sell these slim lapels. So unless you're lucky and you find a nice suit on the secondhand market, or your budget is a little bit higher, let's say around $500 or $600 for a suit, it's going to be very difficult to find wide lapels. So that's why technically I don't really want to call it a mistake, because we all have different budgets, right? But if you have the budget, try to keep in mind that your lapel should match your body type. The next common mistake is wearing the wrong belt with your suit. Now generally, especially with more formal suits, I think it's always a better idea to go with either side adjusters or suspenders, because that creates a much cleaner and coherent look. If you look at a lot of guys that wear belts, they have this really thick belts, and the issue here is that it sort of cuts the suit in half. It destroys the clean line of the suit, and it just doesn't really work that well. So if it's within your budget, I would suggest that for your formal suits, I would always go with either side adjusters or suspenders. And then with your casual suits, let's say for example a summer linen suit, they can actually look really cool with belts, but try to avoid the really wide belts. You generally want to go with slimmer belts. They don't have to be super slim, but definitely slimmer than this. The next mistake is wearing cheap polyester ties. Again, I don't want to blame anyone for their budget, but with the amount of options that you have on the secondhand market, that really shouldn't be an excuse. Because for as low as $5, you can find some amazing looking ties on the secondhand market, made from 100% silk, which are going to look and feel so much better. Another common issue with ties is that the tie doesn't match the width of the lapels. So generally, the wider your lapel, the wider your tie should be, because that just creates much more harmony in your outfit. One of the biggest issues here are the extremes. So let's say you have slim lapels and a really wide tie, or you have really wide lapels and a very slim tie. That typically looks a little bit out of place, so always try to match them. You can see that here in my outfit, the tie is just a little bit too slim for the lapel, so it would be much better if it would be a little bit wider. And staying with ties, another common issue is that guys are wearing ties that are either too long or too short. And that basically just has to do with the way that you tie them, and that's typically an easy fix, because you just have to tie it in a way that it hits the top of your belt line. It can even extend a little bit further, and that's going to look a lot more pleasing and flattering. Another mistake is choosing the wrong type of watch for your suit. As a rule of thumb, the more formal your suit, the more formal your watch should be. So that means that if you wear a very formal suit, you should ideally wear a dress watch as well. And for more casual suits, you can go with a more casual watch as well. Another common issue is wearing the wrong kind of socks, because ideally you want to wear over-the-calf socks. In the past, whenever I heard this tip, I didn't really know exactly what they mean, but once I bought my first pair of over-the-calf socks, you really notice the difference. The issue with regular socks is that they're going to eventually bunch up. Throughout the day, they're going to roll down your ankle. And that means especially when you're sitting down and you're crossing your legs, people will be able to see your legs and also the bunched up socks at the bottom, which is typically not the most flattering look. But if you wear over-the-calf socks, they're going to look great for the entire day. Another common mistake that you even see with celebrities who have a very big budget for their stylist is that they fasten all of the suit buttons. You want to remember that with the classic single-breasted 2-button suit, which is the most common suit out there, you only want to fasten the top button and you want to leave the bottom button unfastened. Otherwise, it simply looks too stiff, and also it sort of ruins the silhouette of the suit. And lastly, I mentioned earlier that one of the issues is doing too much. Now on the flip side, there's a lot of people that actually do too little. It's very common nowadays to only wear a suit and a shirt, but when you're doing that, you're not wearing your suit to the full effect, because that way it always looks like something is lacking. You can get really creative and playful with your ties and with your pocket square, and it's a really fun way to add some personality and color to your suits. So I think when you're skipping this step, you're just leaving a lot of money on the table. And I think it was Guy Ritchie who said in an interview that you can always tell which guy has to wear a suit and which guy wants to wear a suit by the fact that the latter chooses to wear a tie and a pocket square. And I think in most situations, it's always good to choose at least one of those, because it just adds a little bit of visual interest to your look. Gentlemen, those were 13 common style mistakes. Now I have to admit that they are pretty subjective, and in some cases you probably cannot even call it a mistake, but I still believe that if you avoid them, you just get the most out of your suit. And I would love to hear if there are any other mistakes that should be on the list. Please let me know in the comments below. And if you enjoyed the video, leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and see you next week.